Hello and welcome to our final video lecture for this semester. Congratulations on making it this far. You've done really great work and you should be very proud of yourself for making it this far through the semester. So what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of talk about wrapping everything up, putting all of the pieces together and thinking about how all of the concepts that we've talked about and learned about this semester sort of work together. And how do we go and move forward from here? So that's sort of what we're going to talk about this week. So we've been through the process that Kennedy outlines for us in terms of diversity in organizations, and so now we're going to talk more broadly about diversity and sort of the things that we've talked about this semester. At the end of this lecture, we'll also have some discussion around logistics and reminders for the hat paper and things like that. So we've talked about a lot of ideas this semester, and admittedly it can be a bit overwhelming, right? There's a lot of things that we talk about in terms of legality, in terms of sensitivity, in terms of inclusion, diversity itself, and sort of how all of these things work together, and it can be overwhelming, right? The interesting thing about talking about diversity and talking about inclusion in a workplace and even in society, for me at least, is that sometimes when we talk about these things, we can kind of get into a negative space around these things. So look at some of the things that we have listed up here: sexism, prejudice, racism, privilege. These are things that sort of bring to mind the negative aspects of the culture that we have in our country, the culture that we have in our organizations. Now, that's not to say that there aren't positives, and there are lots and lots of positives, right, that diversity brings us. Diversity is such an important thing for our organization, but the negative part about this comes in when we think about all of the work that still needs to be done. We've come a long way in this country and in our culture, in our society, around some of these things, but we have so much work to do, right? We still have so many things that we need to be working on, so many protections that we still need to put in place, so many mindsets, so many hearts that we need to change still. And so it can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes. But there's so many good things happening as well, and I think it's important to keep those in mind too, is that yeah, we are making progress. Sometimes it's slow, and sometimes progress needs to happen maybe a bit more quickly. But good things are happening, and I think that's important to keep in mind as well. So again, I know that there's a lot of information we've covered. What do we do with it all? How do we sort of manage it all moving forward? Well, that's ultimately up to you. It's ultimately up to you to kind of decide those things and determine, what do we do now? So after reflecting on the text that we've read, the materials that we read, the discussions that we've had this semester, and really just sort of how things work in organizations, how things work in a social system, such as an organization or a college or a school or a community, here's some final reflections for you as we think about these things. Making anything stick takes time, dedication, and momentum. So whether that's diversity, whether that is a new policy, a new initiative, having that forward momentum is important, but it takes time. It takes dedicated people that will have some amount of passion around what we're doing, right? It'll take energy and effort on the part of individuals to make these things happen. And we need momentum. We need that positive and forward momentum to make positive change in our organizations. Secondly, when we increase diversity in organizations, we increase the ability of the business to thrive. So one of the things that I think about is this analogy of an ecosystem. If you think about an ecosystem and how it works, you think about this term called biodiversity, right? Biodiversity is a very, very important aspect of an ecosystem, and thriving ecosystems thrive because they have biodiversity. So if you think about a forest, for example, you walk into a forest and you see what? Trees, right? Trees make up a forest, but you have different kinds of trees, You have shrubs, you have plants that grow on the forest floor, you have all of the animals, the insects, and then the things that you can't see, right? The bacteria, and all the other things that sort of make up this ecosystem. You have birds and other animals, snakes, critters, all kinds of stuff that make up this ecosystem. And as a whole, you look at this ecosystem and you say, wow, this functions well, right? Things are balanced. There's sort of harmony in this ecosystem, and it's because there's diversity. It's because each piece of this ecosystem plays a role and it contributes to the overall whole. And I like that analogy as it applies to organizations, in that we're all different from each other and we all have different strengths and abilities. And we all have different backgrounds and different things that make us good at what we do. And if we have organizations that are homogenous, we all look the same, we all think the same, that's really damaging to our organization. That's not beneficial to us whatsoever. So I try to keep this in mind, right? I try to keep this analogy in mind when we talk about diversity, is that ecosystems thrive on diversity and organizations thrive on diversity as well. So I want to bring your attention to a couple things. There's a TED Talk that I've made available for you, How to Start a Movement. It's actually a pretty interesting and entertaining TED Talk. I think you'll like it. It's around kind of how people gravitate towards individuals and how things get started. You'll see that the author talks about what it takes to start a movement, what kinds of characteristics of individuals will be necessary to start that movement, and then things like critical mass, right? How do you build this critical mass around the movement? I also want you to think about something. As you reflect on the semester, what's one aha moment or important lesson that you've taken away from this semester? It may be one thing, it may be two things, maybe several things, but I hope that you have taken some kind of important lesson away from this class, something that you can apply in your workplace. You've done a really, really great job, and you've really thought about things critically. You've engaged with your classmates. You've put some critical thought to paper. And so I hope that you walk away from this class with a new understanding of diversity. So in closing, I want to talk about some things as you put the final touches on your hat. So I want to give you these tips just so that you are prepared to turn in your best work. First, this work should represent you well. And when I say that, what I mean is that if there are spelling errors, if there are grammar errors, if your pages aren't formatted correctly, if things just look bad, it doesn't represent you well, right? This should be your way of putting your best foot forward. This should be how you represent yourself. This is an indication of your work, right? This is an indication of what you do. This should represent you really well. So make sure that you're turning in really high quality work. Second, address the comments and concerns that I've brought up to you in drafts that you have submitted already. So make sure that you're addressing those things and make sure that you're documenting that to me so that I can clearly tell that you have done that. And then lastly, read through the requirements in the rubric and the syllabus thoroughly. The rubric that's included in the syllabus is exactly what I use to determine the final grade on the hat. I try not to hide anything or make anything mysterious or mystified or anything like that. I try to put all the information out there for you so that you have that readily available. So just make sure that you're reading through those requirements and that you could go through and check off these things and evaluate yourself. Make sure that you can do that as well, and you'll be just fine on the hat. So again, in closing, congratulations on making it this far. I know that you'll turn in great work, and I do hope that you've learned something throughout this class. Remember that the hat project is due here in just a couple weeks, and I'll be looking to see your best work put forward in these hat projects. All right, have a great week, and we'll talk soon.